All right. So this is the last lecture for the substance use and abuse thing. So the last little bit we have to cover is all about tobacco. We talked about our other drugs and non-drugs and alcohol. And so tobacco is the last thing. Um, Realized tobacco has more recently. Now you can no longer buy tobacco products at the age of 18. You actually have to be at the age of 21 to buy tobacco products. And so some people were affected with this change of they could buy them and now they can't, and things like that. Um, and so tobacco is something that we are concerned with. It is something legalized. It is something people use. The biggest thing with tobacco and addiction is tobacco is addictive in itself, but there is a substance in tobacco and added to tobacco products called nicotine, and it's one of the most addictive substances in the world. A lot of people want to think about heroin and meth being addictive, and it is, but nicotine can be actually considered more addictive than those things. And so it's also can be deadly. Nicotine can kill you in very small doses if it's pure. What people get of nicotine is not that pure. But it is something very addictive. There are lots of hazards that come along with tobacco use of various types. The nicotine itself causes vasoconstriction, which basically means that blood flow is decreased to all of your extremities, like your hands and your fingers and your toes, your nose and ears. So it decreases circulation, which leads to cardiovascular diseases, leads to problems with taste and smell, problems with breathing possibly. We know that its biggest hazard is cancer causing. There are lots of chemicals in tobacco products that are carcinogenic and lead towards cancers. And that's probably our biggest concern with tobacco for sure. But there are a host of other issues. Literally, using tobacco increases your risk for almost every disease out there and makes it harder to treat those things. You actually heal slower using tobacco products. There are lots of different types of tobacco products that can be consumed or used to consume tobacco or tobacco-like products. Your most traditional is your cigarettes, of course, like most people realize what those are. You then have cigars and pipes. Cigars and pipes are a little bit different, each one of them. Cigars typically have more of a whole tobacco leaf, where cigarettes are more of a chopped tobacco leaf. They can smell different. They are used differently. So cigarettes are breathed very deeply and cause a lot of lung cancers, where cigars and pipes are typically not inhaled quite as deeply. They're more held in the mouth and in the back of the throat. And so they more tend to cause throat cancers. Pipes is where you take chopped tobacco and kind of smoke it out of a pipe, very similar to that of a cigarette type thing. And so there's lots of varieties, lots of different types. Again, all of them have the same risk, but some people prefer others for different reasons. I've smelled a lot of tobacco products. I believe pipe tobacco smells kind of the best out of all of them. Like I kind of do like that smell. I don't try to get around it because it's not good for you in that, but I've smelled it before. And also just personally, if I was going to smoke, again, I don't think it's good for anyone to, but if I was, I could see myself smoking a pipe. Like I just feel like I'm sure you guys could picture me doing that while teaching class, and it just would seem to be what I would do. But again, even though it may seem like what I would do, I would definitely stay away from it. We then have cloves and bibids. Cloves and bibids are actually different than tobacco products. They're a plant that gives a similar feeling to smoking tobacco, but it's a different plant. It's cloves and what they call bibids, and same type of thing. They usually come in cigarette style. These particular products cause the same risk as tobacco products. They're outlawed in the United States currently, and for as far as I know, the foreseeable future, because it tends to be beginner smokers tend to go to these cloves and bibids. The flavors are less mild, so people can stand them a little bit more, and then as they kind of become more experienced in smoking and get used to the flavor, they'll move up to cigarettes and that type of thing. So you guys remember me talking about the guy Sean Ron in a couple of classes. This is what he smokes, those cloves and bibids. He has to go outside of the country to get them and get them back to his home to be able to continue to smoke them. You then have smokeless tobaccos. So these are things like dip, snuff, chew, various different ways from snuff is really fine powder. dip is chopped tobacco leaves, and chew is typically bigger leaves, almost a lot bigger chunks, but they all go into the mouth, and all of the chemicals and nicotine are absorbed through the gums. They're held in the mouth different ways. Typically, there's spitting involved, but again, same risk as all other tobacco use and cancers and other things. It's just more mouth cancers are seen with it. We then have hookahs. Hookahs is very similar to a kind of a pipe. You can smoke other various things from them. It is kind of marketed towards younger people as a safer alternative. It's not any safer. And there are other things that can be smoked in them, but they're all still just as dangerous. And then finally, we have e-cigarettes and vapes. These are newer to the field. We don't know as much about them, but from all initial testing, they do seem to be as bad, if not even worse, than actually using tobacco products. They don't use tobacco itself. They use some kind of chemical liquid to introduce nicotine into the system, which is what people are craving. You can get higher doses of nicotine in these than you can cigarettes. And we tend to see that people who use e-cigarettes and vapes actually inhale more with them than they would any kind of tobacco product. So think about someone you may have seen vaping. I've seen a few people that vape, and I'm not sure they've taken a breath of fresh air in months ever since they started vaping, because they're using it so constantly, which you would never see someone doing with cigarettes or cigars. And so we do have to consider that. Long term, we're pretty sure that they're going to cause just as many health problems as currently with tobacco. We just haven't had enough usage of them to see. We then have environmental tobacco smoke. This is something for us to worry about, and kind of why it is a public health kind of hazard type of thing, that we worry about other people that don't smoke with environmental tobacco smoke. It's not just the people who do smoke. Environmental tobacco smoke is sometimes referred to by another term. Do you guys know what other term might refer to environmental tobacco smoke?
Secondhand smoking?
Yeah, so secondhand smoke. So environmental tobacco smoke actually includes things like secondhand smoke, and I'll talk about something called third-hand smoke. Secondhand smoke is where you're around someone smoking and they're breathing out the smoke, and the smoke coming off the cigarette, you wind up breathing it in. This is actually worse for you than smoking as far as like the chemicals you're ingesting. It doesn't go through a filter. It doesn't do a lot, but the filter does do a little bit. And so you don't get as high of a concentration, but the little bit you do is actually worse than the same amount of actually smoking. And so we do know that this can cause long-term health effects, especially if you're around someone constantly that smokes, live in a household where there's smoke all the time, can lead to cancers and actually the same health effects as smoking yourself. We then have third-hand smoke, which is just as dangerous as secondhand smoke. Again, the concentration isn't as high, but again, repeated exposures to this, constant exposure to it, could be something that does increase this. Some of you may be asking what third-hand smoke is. Third-hand smoke is where maybe you weren't in contact with the person who smoked, you weren't around them when they were smoking, but you were still exposed to some of the harmful effects and chemicals. And so an example of this would be my mom works at in a kindergarten classroom, and one of her jobs each morning is to take the kids' backpacks and kind of pull out their folders that they turn in their work and send them home with things in. Well, if a child comes from a home where there was smoking present, and especially in high levels that smoking was present, the smoker, it gets firsthand smoke, the child would get secondhand smoke, but that backpack would be covered in those kind of chemicals from the smoke. And so when my mom goes to open up that backpack, she smells this overwhelming smell of tobacco smoke, of cigarette smoke, and maybe it feels like there's smoke coming out of the backpack even though there's not. She is being exposed to those chemicals, and that can be dangerous for her health. Or if you've ever been around someone who's smoked recently, or someone who came from a household that smokes and they're wearing a jacket, that jacket may smell like smoke, and that can introduce those chemicals as well. And so because of these environmental tobacco smoke things, we know that we do need to consider others when it comes to tobacco policies. It can't just be, well, that person's only affecting themselves, so we'll let them do whatever. We do have to be considerate of others. So we've tried to encourage the stopping of smoking in various ways, from laws to kind of cultural changes, things like that. And so that's really the thing. We have smoking cessation programs and things to get people off. There are all kinds of laws where used to you could smoke just about anywhere. Now you can't smoke on college campuses. I actually went to college when you could. You can't smoke in restaurants. I remember going to restaurants and having to ask for the non-smoking section. You can't do that any longer. You can't smoke in your car now, except or when children are present. Pretty much about the only place you can smoke now is almost, kind of out in the open, out and not the public outside and in your own home. And while these laws are effective, what do you think? There is one law, or there's one thing someone could do or set a law that we know is more effective than anything else in deterring smoking. What do you think the biggest thing we can do to help deter or help people to quit smoking is? Okay, so you guys might not know, but actually, price is one of the biggest things we can do as far as getting people to stop smoking. Um, So we know that a pack of cigarettes in Georgia currently cost about $4. And there's a lot of people that smoke here. New York has lower rates of smoking, especially in the interior, because smoking a pack of cigarettes up there has been taxed so heavily, where a pack of cigarettes can cost $12 to $15. And we know that price, when people can't afford to smoke, they tend to go and figure out ways to stop that because they can't literally afford it. Does all this make sense?
Yes.
Awesome. So that kind of covers our tobacco, which we didn't have too much to cover and wasn't too concerned